Framework Fireside Chat for the elementary TK through 5th grade. Again, we've got the resource link for you right there, and that is the materials that you'll need as you go through your math framework read and submission of public comments. In the chat box, I also put in a link for the LA County Math Leaders Network for TOSAs and specialists. If you are not yet a member of that, our next meeting is actually next Wednesday. And then I've also put in two additional links, one for Engaging Girls in STEM, which is an ongoing program right now through May. And then we're very excited again next Wednesday to have Dr. Mujige Cooper, who is involved in the Mars 2020 mission. And we really would love for you to share that with your students. Invite the students to go ahead and register now, invite the parents, and feel free to register yourself as well. It should be a fun and exciting event. I'm Anthony Kwan, your STEM coordinator here with LA County Office of Education. I am your first point of contact for all things Common Core Math, Next Generation Science Standards, STEM initiatives, and Computer Science Standards. So you are here today, again, to find out what's going on with the math framework. So the session that's provided for you today is to give you an overview of the importance and development of that math framework. Give you a real quick overview of the content in the math framework, specifically at the elementary, and then also to give you some notions of what's going on in terms of potential obstacles or points of contention, as well as give you some suggestions about how to read and make the comments and how to set up your own deeper dives with teachers at your own school site or district level as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, please use that chat box to put in reactions, comments, or questions. I will be monitoring that along the way as well. All right. Okay, so why do we need a math framework? The math framework, or the purpose of the math framework, is really to guide the field in implementing the Common Core mathematics. It is also providing you with guidance in terms of how to actually use the standards for content as well as the math practices. And we're going to get into this a little bit deeply, but it does provide the evaluation criteria for instructional materials. So as far as the California Math Framework Committee itself, the CFCC, that is the Math Framework Committee, they were charged with developing that revised math framework that follows an extensive state board approved set of guidelines, again, that supports the implementation of the Common Core state standards. But it's really 7 major guidelines, and then within those 7 major guidelines, there are additional guidelines for a total of 53 in total. And again, that was set by the State Board of Ed and created by the Instructional Quality Commission, specifically the Math Subcommittee. And again, that is where the public comments come in. Okay, continuing on. As far as the curriculum framework goes, the chair the chairs or the co-chairs of the math framework are Lori Freiermuth and Dan Wilson, who are 2 classroom teachers. And just if you aren't aware, the framework committee members, it's a set of 20 people, and at least 12, okay, at minimum 12 are classroom teachers. So they're practicing teachers who serve on that committee. When I served on the Science Framework Committee, the 12 were 4 elementary, 4 middle, and 4 high school. And I'm almost sure that the math framework had the same similar makeup of 4 elementary, 4 middle, and 4 high school. So 51% makes up the framework committee. So the myth that only non-educators are working on these guidance for teachers is untrue, all right? The other 8 members of the 20-member team are made up of county office folks, educational leaders from other professional development organizations such as California Math Council, as well as university professors. The writers or the lead writers of the math framework for this round was led by Brian Jacob Lindemann from Chico State University, joined by his colleague Catherine Early. Many of you are fully aware of Joe Bowler from Stanford University, who was also joined by her colleague Ben Ford, and then rounded out by Dr. Jennifer Langer-Osuna from Sonoma State. So those are your lead writers. They're the ones who took care of all of the content, and it was reviewed heavily by the actual Math Framework Committee of 20. For those of you who are just joining us, please feel free to put in the chat box the name of your school or district and the grade level that you're involved with, and then I've also put in the resource link for you. This is being recorded, so again, you will get this recording as well as any additional resources. All right. So as far as the framework timeline went, it started back in 2019 where the state board approved the timeline for action and implementation of the framework, but it also improved the application process for the Math Framework Committee members. Through June and November, the Framework Committee members were recruited, and then the final recommendation were made in November. In January, the state board went ahead and approved those members, and so when you get the PowerPoint from that link, you can click on that CFCC and find out who the 20 members are. And then that guidelines piece, you can also click on that to read up on what 53 guidelines the committee and the writers have to follow as far as the input for the math framework. Then in February through December, the Framework Committee met with the writers and met pretty much all virtually and spent many hours trying to figure out how to update and refine the current framework that we have now. So we're now in 2021. And the 60-day public comment period started in February 8th and will go through April 8th. And again, that is the first 60-day public comment. Once that ends, all the comments will go to the CDE, and the CDE will then give it to the Instructional Quality Commission members. They will read through the public comment and then send all those comments to the writers, who will then take a next stab at the updates, taking into consideration all of the comments that came in from the public. Then it goes back to the Instructional Quality Commission, who will then make the recommendation to the state board, and then state board and CDE will go ahead and approve it. And then we will have our second round of 60-day public comments that will take place in June and end in July. And then the cycle begins again with all those comments going back to the CDE, to the Instructional Quality Commission, to the writers, and then back to the commission, who will then make the final recommendation to the state board. And then in November, the state board will take action. And so they have one of three possibilities that could take place. One is to approve the framework fully as written. The second one is to accept it and with caveats, with recommendations and needed changes. Or the third option, which is to reject altogether. Since we are in that first 60-day public comment period, we don't know what's going to happen, but from what I've noticed of the framework, I am definitely hoping that it will be approved fully as is. So in 2022, that is when the framework is going to get implemented throughout the state of California, and that also begins the instructional materials development. And then in 2023, we should begin the next round or the next cycle of math adoptions, followed by professional development around the framework, as well as now starting the next process of refining the Smart Balance math test. All right, so as far as the purpose of the framework, this is one of the reasons why we have to have it, and this is through Ed Code 60200, which requires instructional materials for grades K through 8 be state adopted at least every 8 years. So again, because this is Ed Code, we are a textbook adopting state, and we only adopt books K through 8th grade. And in order for that adoption to take place, we have to have a brand new set of framework that aligns to the instructional materials. Now, for those of you who are, again, not aware or may have forgotten, the current adoption that we have now are aligned not to the current math framework, but to the previous framework, which is actually not Common Core aligned at all. So the current adoption that you have are partially aligned to the Common Core. So again, once this new framework is adopted, it'll start the development of the brand new set of materials, which will hopefully be 100% aligned to the Common Core. Okay. All right. Again, the purpose of the framework review is to, again, for you to provide additional guidance, because you are the ones who are the practicing teachers or the ones who are facilitating the development of the teachers in the classroom. This is also your opportunity for your voice to be heard, and again, it's your suggestions that's going to help build a powerful document for the framework writers. Okay. So we're going to get right into it, what is new from the 2013 framework. But before I do that, I want to pause here and just give you a moment to ask any questions or clarifying comments. And while you're doing that, I'm going to take a quick sip of my drink. All right, I'm not seeing any comments, so we're going to go ahead and move forward. So what's new then? Here are the major additions that we are now seeing in the brand new adoption. In the brand new math framework. There's an emphasis on access and depth rather than remediation or acceleration. So again, the message of depth over breadth. You're going to also see in every single chapter lots of addressing of the equity and engagement strategies. And then some of you may have heard about this, but now we're also seeing some new language in the form of focused instruction using big ideas via mathematical practices, along with the use of content connections and drivers of investigation. So I will explain all those a little bit more later. There's also a refinement of the high school pathway discussions, and then what we're really excited about are the progression charts of learning across TK through 12th grade. So that is definitely a huge boon, a huge plus. Looking forward to that. Additional things that are taking place. In the TK through 12 chapters, you're going to see two new chapters that are focused on content. And the content is around number sense and data science. And then there's another chapter that's focusing on the standards for mathematical practices. And this is where I'll talk a little bit more about it later as well. But there's some confusion or some fears around the math practices. But again, we'll get to that when we get to that particular chapter. There's also some additional language in terms of strong language regarding reductions or removal of tracking. All students should take the same courses TK through 10. So that's a huge recommendation, specifically aimed at the middle school as well. Other things that you're going to be seeing are these whole asset-based structures. Whoops. An asset-based mindset infused approach. So basically what we're talking about is a social justice component that's going to be written throughout the framework. And then there's also an update in terms of a definition on fluency, which is going to be very interesting for you to read, especially for you who are teaching at the elementary level. All right. There's also going to be these a proposal that students really have to spend more time doing hands-on, minds-on, or authentic learning through tasks and strategies. And then, of course, again, the approach to mathematics of making sure that there's context for the content. So really providing the why of students doing the mathematics. Okay? All right. So we're going to go ahead and get right into chapters from this point. Now, I want to also before I get into this, I want to make this clarification as well. When we talk about the framework is a separate project and document from the standards. So the framework is not synonymous with the standards as much as the framework supports the standards. Okay, so the Common Core state standards will not change, will not be touched. there's also some misconceptions that framework also has something to do with the statewide test. And again, the framework is its own separate document, own separate project. It has nothing to do with the Smarter Balance test. So the framework does not inform how the test is delivered or how it's going to be written, all right? So again, all of those are separate. The framework, if anything, supports the Common Core state standards for mathematics, all right? So they are related in that sense, but it is not the standards themselves. And the framework chapters do not have any effect on the Smarter Balance test itself, okay? All right. So as far as the chapters, what's different between the current 2013 framework and the brand new one that would be approved for 2022? So on the left-hand side, you can see that these are all the different chapters. There was an intro, the overview. In the 2013 framework, there's a chapter for every single grade level. There's a chapter on traditional high school path, integrated higher level, a chapter on universal access, etc., etc. So it's just a lot of chapters and a lot of reading on that part. On the right-hand side, there's only 13 chapters. And so the intro is still going to be important for you to read. So that is the first chapter that everyone should read. So again, as you begin your dive into this, don't skip over chapter 1. You really need to read chapter 1 because chapter 1 sets up the understanding for how all of the other chapters are going to be written. Plus, all the chapters are interrelated, interwoven. So what I mean by that is that as you read through it, it's going to make references to additional chapters. So that means that literally you are going to have to read every single chapter from beginning to end, okay? Don't just go straight into the TK5 because you're not going to get the full impact or all the information necessary that's there, all right? But what you are going to see are some major changes in the sense that all of the grade level chapters are actually condensed into one chapter. So the TK5 are all in one chapter. The middle school is one chapter. All the high schools are in one chapter. You can see that there are no instructional strategies chapter because that is going to be embedded within all of the chapters as well as support, etc., etc. There is going to be also a separate technology piece, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But that is all part of the assessment as well as the supporting equitable and engaging math instruction pieces and other things like that. But overall, what I can tell you is that I read through all of the chapters myself, and it is a quick and really a wonderful read on my part. But if you are a nerd like me as well, you'll probably have fun reading it anyway. But that's just my opinion. That's your job is to go through it and make that decision for yourself. Okay. So let's go ahead and start with chapter 1. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a question. Are these chapters only online or is there a way to get a paper copy? Nope, it's all online. It's all online. And so I actually went ahead and downloaded it and copied it. So I printed it out for myself. Okay, and it fits a 3-inch binder. So let's just say that. It fits a 3-inch binder. Okay. So chapter 1, what's going on in chapter 1? As I said, this is the place where you need to begin reading all of the content. And again, this sets up all of the other chapters from this point forward. So in chapter 1, it is going back to the basis of the 2013 framework, which is all around coherence, focus, and rigor. And so it's also really clarifying what coherence, focus, and rigor means now that we've been in Common Core for over a decade now. Okay, and so in this particular chapter, we're also seeing for the first time these big ideas, these drivers of investigation, and these content connections. And again, I'm going to go into a little bit of depth with those a little bit later when we get to the content chapter. But what you're also going to be seeing in chapter 1 is a lot of explicit language and support based on the equity in mathematics, but also based on the research. So a lot of brain-based learning on here, a lot of things on mindset, and a lot of language around sense making. And so the graphic that you see is the first graphic that is kind of pivotal to the entire framework, because it is really making an explicit statement that in order for math content to be accessible, teachers must use those standards for math practices. Okay, and then on the bottom, you're going to see four components. Those 4 components are your content connectors, and then you've got your drivers of investigation that are right there in that block right there. Okay, so we'll get to more of this graphic a little bit more as well, because this is just kind of like a taste of what you're going to be expecting, okay? And again, for those of you who are just joining us, welcome. Please go ahead and use that chat box to type in the name of your school or district, as well as the grade level that you're working with. And then that I've also put into the chat box the resource link. We are recording this, so you will get this recording as well. All right, so moving on to chapter 2. Again, for this particular fireside chat, you're just getting a really surface level overview of all of these chapters. So in chapter 2, it's all around teaching for equity engagement. So in this particular chapter, for this particular chapter, it opens with a direct call for the use of culturally responsive teaching. So it includes language around cultural relevancy, as well as a surface level address of the inequities of key demographic groups. This chapter also continues with a recommendation of components of equitable and engaging practices with vignettes and snapshots. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about those vignettes and snapshots when we get to the grade level chapter, but it will provide a better sense of what teaching should look like in the classroom. And so that is the basis of those vignettes and snapshots. But you can also see here from the table of content, it's going to really focus around these 5 components of equitable and engaging teaching. Again, it's going to start addressing the new language of what it means to plan or teach around the big ideas. But it is again also calling out explicitly the use of authentic tasks for students. Again, going to addressing the social justice aspect, and really focusing on, again, making sure that students are able to ask questions and reason. And then there's also definitely an address of the UDL, or the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines. That's for all grade levels, as well as all the different subgroups, specifically the special ed population. Okay, so as far as teaching the big ideas really is a new lens into the way that we should be teaching math, but it's also a way for the K-12 teachers, including the TK, to really think about how these standards could be bundled or packaged so that it makes sense to students as they are learning the content. So the approach of the big ideas really allows time for students to explore the fundamental ideas, and then making sure that students can link what the practices are, the standards for math practices are, in line with the content standards. Additionally, that same content is taught and learned, but the organization allows for a more coherent approach. So going back to what many of you may know as MTSS, that's what it's in reference to. And then it's coming from the research from Jo Bowler and her colleagues from the book that you can get, which is What is Mathematical Beauty? All right. All right, so chapter 3, number sense. So this is the first of 2 chapters that's devoted to exploring the development of a particular content area. That's K-12. And so number sense is definitely a crucial foundation for all later mathematics, but it's also been found to be the early predictor of mathematical perseverance. So in this chapter breaks down the content by grade span beginning with TK2 all the way up into high school. And again, the chapter also includes vignettes and snapshots, which provides a sense of what this should look like in the classroom, and again, coming from the field as well. And so when I say coming from the field, that means that all of the examples are actually exemplars because they have been tried and tested out in real classrooms up and down the state of California. All right. Okay, so you can see here again, the emphasis here is the demonstration of how number sense underlies much of the contents that students are going to encounter as they go up the grade level. All right, so that's chapter 3, number sense. As we get into chapter 4 is where we talk about, or the writers are going to talk about, the development of related clusters of standards for math practices. So this is where I'm going to need to clarify. What you're seeing here, or what you're going to be reading, is just one lens of many, and it is really beyond the scope of the framework and the framework writers to develop what progressions would look like for every single standard for math practice. However, this chapter does provide a lens, at least one lens, as to which teachers, or rather teams of teachers, could develop their own understanding and use of the standards for math practices. In this case, the framework writers decide to focus on 3 bundles of the math practices. In this case, standards for math practice 3, construct valuable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. Number 7, look for and make use of structure. And 8, look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. So the misconception from those who saw the early draft of this, the misconception was that, oh, the framework writers are telling us that we only need to focus on 3 standards for math practice. We can forget all the other ones. No, that is not what that message is. The message is for this chapter is that it's showing you one way to think about how to bundle these standards for math practice in a coherent manner that allows students to really grapple and apply these standards for math practices. So it's focusing on these 3 components, but still pulling in the rest of them as well. And so again, this is designed to provide one paradigm or one lens for how these standards for math practices can be incorporated into a viable lesson or a coherent lesson from beginning to end. Okay, hopefully that explains that a little bit more. Okay. This chapter further goes into an emphasis that to develop the need for habits of mind, which many of us are pretty much already familiar with, but then there's also this habits of interaction. So this chapter is really asking us as teachers to train students to really become inquisitors of mathematics. So we want them to talk about their thinking. We want them to try to rationalize or justify the answers that they are coming up with, starting from TK going all the way up. So you can see the quote here from Gutstein. The goal is that students learn to use math to examine various phenomena, both in one's immediate life and in the broader social world, and to identify the relationships and make connections between them. So the message here is, again, how do you provide the context, the why for learning and doing the mathematics? So that's what this chapter is all about. Okay. And I do want to also bring up a disconnect that we're seeing. And sometimes it doesn't happen too much at the elementary, more so at the upper grade levels, but there is a disconnect in terms of the discussion of what deeper practices versus more content topics. So in this case, it's really talking about how we as teachers really should not be pigeonholed or be stressed out by the standards and to be really locked into the standards in the sense of, oh my gosh, we need to get through every single standard. So we're now again talking about making sure that students are just seeing the mathematics and not worry about understanding it. And this is again really more prevalent at the high school level, where the higher level teachers or higher order math teachers, such as the Algebra 2, Calculus, those teachers, they're pretty much teaching students and making sure that they get an abbreviated version of every single topic that they feel students need to know in order to be successful in mathematics. And then by the time they leave high school and then go into college, we're actually seeing the opposite happen. So college professors are actually don't care about whether or not students have been exposed to the math as much as do they actually understand the deeper foundations. So do students coming into the college, do they really understand the fundamentals? Do they really understand the foundations? So the message again here is that students entering college have a superficial grasp of superfluous procedures and little conceptual frameworks. Okay, so again, this doesn't happen too much at the elementary, although we do from time to time hear how, again, that we need a way to just make sure that we cover all of these standards and don't worry about students not understanding, they'll catch up. And that's not necessarily true, and that's not necessarily happening as well. Okay. All right. So in chapter 5, the data science, this is the second of 2 chapters that are devoted to, again, exploring the development of a particular content area. So over the last decade, there really has been an increased emphasis on the need for data and understanding how to use it. In fact, this is now an explicit career pathway, which makes sense in a world driven by data. As a result, this is equally important to every child as they learn to be part of a global citizen in the 21st century and beyond. So again, you can see this is coming straight out from the framework itself, these quotes, that data science is an emerging discipline, and 1.7 megabytes of digital data were created and stored every second for every person on Earth in just this last year. And that's just crazy to think about. So in this chapter, you're going to be understanding what the principles of data collection is. And again, this whole data science is intended to be taught starting at the lower grades, TK, all the way up through into the high school. So understanding what the principle of data collection is, how to manipulate and analyze data, not saying that that's what kindergartners or pre-K, TK students have to do, but that is something that it will develop over time. How to infer what data is saying, but more importantly, when they look at any kind of charts, graphs, or any kind of visual, can they interpret what it's saying, but more importantly, can they communicate what they're also seeing as well, right? Okay, so in the beginning of this chapter also has a very, very explicit first line that this is a work in progress. But again, the focus on this is data literacy, data science, and the types of experiences that students should have when it comes to the exposure to data science, right? And the types of experiences again include things that should be authentic in nature. There's also an address of how data science, that content transitions from PK going into the K5, going into the 6-8, going to the 9-12. All right. And again, that's the key message for this chapter, that all California students should graduate from high school with data literacy and options to learn an introduction to data science. Okay, so that's the message right there. All right, so before I get into chapter 6, I'm going to give you a moment to just process what I've said. I'll try to stay quiet and allow you to, again, react, provide any kind of comment or need for clarification in the chat box. Okay, so that was 20 seconds of wait time for me. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So chapter 5 is needing some recommendation and revision. Absolutely, so it's still a work in progress. So they really want you to read up on that chapter, especially since all of you are elementary. They want to make sure that it makes sense as well. So as you're reading it, feel free to provide some comments or language that would be helpful for the writers to include or consider as they're rewriting this particular chapter. Okay, all right. Yes, we're going to show you how to do that. Okay, I will show you how to do that. So chapter 6, as far as chapter 6, the TK through 5th grade, I want to make sure that you understand all of the grade span chapters will contain a vignette. And so I'm really excited by the vignettes because I've been reading through them and they're really fabulous. So the vignettes are a series of multiple lessons from start to finish. And when I say multiple lessons, we're talking about what one particular, I guess you could say it's a unit. I think some of them could potentially be a unit. So a series of lessons that starts on day 1 and then ends on day 7, 6, or whatever it is. So you actually get to read up and see what Common Core, what a true Common Core aligned lesson should look like, or series of lessons should look like. And again, the vignettes have been vetted, so that means that they have been used in classrooms up and down the state of California. So again, it's a series of multiple lessons from start to finish. The snapshots are just that. It's taking one lesson from a vignette, not necessarily the ones that have been included, but it's definitely one lesson from a vignette that you're dropped into and you're seeing what that lesson is all about. Okay. Some other things that you should be aware of are these environmental literacy initiatives. And basically, the ELI are embedding itself in all of the content frameworks since the inception of the science framework that happened a couple of years ago. So you're going to be seeing this in the upcoming version of the ELA-ELD framework. You already see it in the history framework, the C3, but you're also going to see it in subsequent framework from this point forward. The other thing is that you're also going to see language in the chapters that refers to the ELA-ELD framework as well as the science framework. So again, as a result of the California Science Framework, that the CDE, have decided that all the framework should not be written in isolation. So that means that for you as elementary teachers, you now have more resources to really conduct a true thematic-based lessons or a well-rounded lesson, because now all of the framework that are up and coming will be tied together, which is again really, really nice. The grade span chapters will also explain how to use the drivers of investigation, because the drivers of investigation is the why of learning. The content connectors are the how of learning, and both of those lead into the big ideas, which again push on the need for equitable math practices. And again, you're going to see the progressions from TK all the way through 5th grade. Okay, so the drivers of investigation are made up of these 3 points right here. So driver investigations 1, 2, and 3, and these are consistent TK through 12th grade. And so if you have been teaching science and you are familiar with the NGSS foundations, then the drivers of investigations are very similar to the cross-cutting concepts, where the cross-cutting concepts, where the drivers of investigation are supposed to be tied to each other or connect to each other, which allows students to really think about the mathematics more conceptually, but it also allows them to engage with the mathematics in a more authentic fashion, as well as create a level of curiosity for them. The content connectors are what drives the instructional activities. And again, they can also connect to each other as well. So they can be done in isolation, but they should also be used in conjunction with each other. So the content connections really allows you to look at the standards and organize it in such a way around these content connections that make sense to you, which then will make sense to students. All right. And again, it provides a coherence all the way up and down through the grade level. So these are consistent TK through 12th grade as well. Okay. So again, these are going to be fully explained in the chapter, and you get a huge introduction in chapter 1 regarding the drivers of investigation and content connections. So as far as the diagram here, again, this is a two-dimensional diagram. So when you first look at it, it looks like, oh, so those drivers of investigation really doesn't make sense because it doesn't tie into everything. That's not necessarily true. So again, this is a two-dimensional figure, but if you were to turn this into a three-dimensional, like a tube of some sort, so then you'll see that the drivers of investigation really does spiral all the way up and down the standards for math practice, and that it is used in throughout every single one of those content connectors. All right, so that's what that is again. So again, the content connections are the how, and the drivers of investigation refers to the why. Okay. All right. So here are the major highlights, though, that I want to make sure that you are looking forward to. So again, it's going to break down what content connectors are for grade spans, TK2 and 3-5. It will talk specifically about these instructional practices and strategies. It'll also provide some tables around critical areas for instruction. So again, a lot of that MTSS work. You will, as you continue to read, see an emphasis or push for more hands-on, minds-on type of access. And then there's also going to be an address of the transition from elementary to middle school, as well as the progressions from learning. The other thing I want to tell you about is that specifically at the TK2 level, you're going to be seeing an emphasis on the use of math talks. And then there's also a heavy use or a heavy push for making sure that students at TK through 2 learn how to use models. So again, the drawings and other things like that. And more importantly, that students at the TK2 level really do get to explore math through application. So again, authentic experiences, not just, okay, here's the book, go to page so-and-so, do problem so-and-so, right? That's not what we're talking about. At the 3-5, the emphasis for 3rd through 5th grade is on, at least what I'm referencing, or what I think it's referencing, is around the mathematical reasoning, where students are going to really need to develop the skills of explanation, again, through the use of models or drawings. So making their thinking visible. That's what the emphasis is for 3rd through 5th grade. Without the foundation of TK2, we will see that students are not going to be able to further develop their understanding of the conceptual basis or concepts like orders of operation, the use of fractions, measurement of area and volume, etc., etc. So that's something for you to really think about as you read through this chapter. Okay. Okay. So, and then we're going to go through really quickly the other chapter highlights so that I can talk to you about how to make comments to the writers and to the state. Okay. So as far as the other chapter highlights, Chapter 9, Supporting Equitable Engaging Mathematics, this is really the professional development chapter, but more importantly, this is meant for the administrators. And this is definitely for use by your content specialists, coaches, TOSAs, etc., because there is an address of several things that I'm really excited to see. It's now touching upon teacher preparation and how we really need to have a partnership with the colleges when it comes to teacher preparation. There's a specific address for induction program, which did not really exist before in any particular framework. And it clarifies how the professional development for teacher preparation and induction program has to be different from in-service teachers. So that means veteran teachers or practicing teachers right now. For those of you who are the TOSA's specialists, this is very important because it's calling out what effective PD would look like if you know what the characteristics for PD are. But there's also an address about how you should plan for PD. And what's really nice, again, is that you've got some coaching vignettes and PD vignettes around models and strategies. There's also an address here about how parents and families play an important role here as well. Okay, so this is a huge chapter for the administrators and the TOSAs and coaches, but for you as the practicing classroom teacher, this is something that you can also use to ensure that when you go to professional development at the district level, or your grade level meetings, etc., that it should be following these characteristics so that you're not wasting your time. Okay. Chapter 10 is all about technology and distance learning, which is based on everything that we've done, you can see it's really an important chapter because going into the fall of next year, we don't know what could potentially happen. We might all be able to go back, we might be in hybrid, or we may return back to distance learning. So in this chapter, it's really talking about more than just the use of technology. So it's really explaining how you should effectively use technology in terms of being introduced to the principles. But more importantly, there's going to be a huge section about what distance learning should have looked like for all of us. So again, moving into the summer, moving into the fall, this will definitely be a game changer in terms of having some consistent guidance about what distance learning, what hybrid learning should have looked like from the start. Okay. Chapter 11 is all around the assessment, and again, this has nothing to do with the statewide test, although there is going to be an address and gives you a clearer understanding of the aspects of the statewide testing that you should have been made more aware of. But more importantly, it's an address of the formative assessments, specifically around the use of rubrics and standards-based grading, which has really been a hot topic. I'm very much aware of how there are schools or districts out there who are struggling with how to implement standards-based grading, and this chapter actually does it for you. Okay. Chapter 12 is around the instructional materials. So that with this, it begins with the criteria for what instructional materials or what high quality instructional materials should look like. And talks about the 3 types of program that are approved by the state of California, which are your basic grade level texts, K through 8, K through 8, and then Algebra 1 and Math 1. Then you're also going to read up on what the 5 categories of criteria for evaluation are. So here I want you to understand that there's also other components here. There's also social content review that's also taking place. And then for this chapter was really meant for the publishers. And so there are 3 concepts that are critical for the publishers. One of them is this whole idea of content coverage. So making sure that there is full alignment to both the standards, the content standards, as well as the math practices. They should also be very aware of the content depth, which is the ability of materials to be used by you, the teacher, including the use of the math practices in application. And then finally, content delivery. So they need to make sure that they are providing guidance that provides high quality instruction, which is really around the pedagogical delivery and scope and sequence. So what I will also tell you here is that, again, based on what happened with the Science Framework Committee and the work that was done there, the instructional materials, the publishers will probably more likely be highly recommended to attend a one-day training around this particular chapter so that when the next cycle of adoptions take place, you will be given, or you will have access to a list that really are of high quality and not just eh. All right. And then finally, we get to chapter 13, which is just a glossary, and it's just an overview of the common acronyms that we're now seeing in education, some terms that could be seen and used in multiple iterations, as well as tables for that. But here's what you are really looking for is how do you provide guidance to the state of California? So one of the important reasons why this is included is because when you finally do submit comments to the CDE and to the framework writers, what the CDE has isn't helpful. All it says is something like this: chapter 1, you have 1,000 characters to use. It doesn't tell you how to provide the comments at all, right? So I want to make sure that you know the do's and don'ts, and then some of the things that you need to keep in consideration as you're reading, and then how to actually write out the critique to the writers, all right? So as far as providing the input, so here's the do's. Be sure that your recommendations are aligned to the context of the framework, okay? That's going to be clear and must be very important here. You need to advise the writers that a sentence or a paragraph is, I'm sorry, if the sentence or paragraph is unclear, you really are going to need to provide some language to them. So don't tell them that, you know, that whole paragraph in chapter 4 doesn't make sense at all. That's not helpful to a writer. So make sure that you are helpful by providing language for them. If you suggest an item to a table or ask for an item to be deleted, make sure that you have some strong justification, because you should not be focusing on any typos at all. But more importantly, the vignettes, the tables, the diagrams, the illustrations, all of those are not necessarily able to be changed, okay? But again, if you feel strongly about it, make sure that you provide some justification as to why something should be edited or added or removed, okay? Again, comments such as "I don't like that" is not helpful to the writer, so you need to make sure that you are being very clear about why you don't like that particular paragraph, or why a certain content needs to be removed or needs to be edited out, re-edited. Order of the chapters are not going to be subject to change, and again, the number of pages, that's something that you have no control over as well. The other thing that I also want to make sure that you know of, when you make your recommendations of any kind of changes or edits, make sure that you refer to the chapter and the line number as well, okay? So something like, chapter 5, line 648 through line 660 wasn't unclear for this reason, and write out the reason, right? And again, if you have something like that, that will be helpful to the writers themselves, okay? So again, I kind of told you who reads the comments and then what happens to those comments and how it gets back to the writers. So this is where I want you to now also think about the questions that you need to consider as you're reading through it. So again, as you read through the framework, it's important that you have the right lens as you make your way into the documents. So let's go and dive into some of those thoughts or questions, okay? The California Math Framework calls for explicit instructional shifts in paradigms. So as you're reading through it, does the guidance adequately support the standards for math practices? And for all the chapters, you're going to want to think about what are the strengths and weaknesses, as well as what you would like to keep, okay? A second big idea is around the whole big ideas, drivers investigations, vignettes, etc. But does that math framework help teachers, you, the elementary teachers, develop a variety of expertise that could be translated into an equitable math classroom? So again, the question would be, how would you improve upon those unit sequences? How would you improve upon the drivers and connectors? And it could be, again, language about how to make it clear for teachers to understand. And the writers would be interested in terms of what grade level or levels did you focus on. Okay. Does the framework provide guidance for districts about middle school instruction? So again, if you're not in the middle school, but you are a sixth grade teacher, and that's something that you may want to think about in terms of, again, is the information helpful? And again, what are the improvements? What would you like to keep? Okay. Does it you don't need to know about the high school, and then does the math framework support access to standard-based curriculum for all students? So again, does it do it successfully? What improvements would you ask to be made? What would you like to keep? Is assessment also, is the assessment effective? Was it effectively written by the writers? Again, does it what would you keep? How would you improve it? Is the equity addressed well? Does it fit it? How would you improve it? And then again, is there anything that's missing? So what other suggestions do you have for the next draft that would be coming out? Okay. So as far as suggestions for your own framework party, some of the things that you want to think about is, if you are the lead teacher, will you have support by the district, or a coach, or a TOSA, or a specialist? Contact me if you have any need for any kind of resources or facilitation ideas. And then thinking about the logistics in terms of, is there a go-to website or an email that anybody who has questions could go to? And then as far as submission, is it going to be submitted by a group, or is it going to be submitted by each individual? So as far as the how do you access the submission, or where you submit it, you go to that website right there. HTT, that's the CDE website, and it's going to take you straight to this image right there, and it's the link that's in pink that will take you straight to the online survey. All right, that's also where you'll find all of the draft chapters there, but I've also put it in the resource link for you. For your easy use, so that you won't have to search for it wherever you are. And I'm going to see if I can type this into the chat box for you really quickly, so that you can go ahead and just kind of open it up, and then just kind of bookmark that for yourselves. Okay, and that should do it for you. Okay. So you have that there for yourselves. If you have any additional assistance, make sure that you go to the CMC website that's right there. And then I forgot to also include the CDE email if you have additional questions that you can ask the CDE. So I'll email that to you as well. And the CMC Math link that's here will have videos that you can watch from the writers themselves, because they took a deeper dive in one or two chapters, and so the CMC have recorded them and made those publicly available to all of you. And then the website will also provide you with links to other workshops and other fireside chats that are taking a deeper dive in specific chapters. So that's another place that you can go to as well. All right. So that's all of the information I have for you.